So we just have one more panel. It's about the rise of DeFi, what this means for Web3. And so they're going to talk about how has DeFi gotten here, where is it going? It's slowly building behind the scenes, and how do we get to the next stage? How do we get this mass adoption with DeFi, transitioning from the TradFi, from the banks, to this new exciting ecosystem. And so yeah, with that, I'll let the moderator introduce themselves, but let's give it up. Woo!
Very much.
Hello, everybody. Hello.
Hey, guys.
Right. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thank you very much for taking your afternoon and coming to see us four folk. For those who are hanging around as my esteemed introductor, I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about DeFi and the rise of DeFi and into Web3. So I wanted to introduce some of our guests that we've got with us here. I'm going to do it in order. First of all, we've got Zaki here from Sommelier Protocol. We've got Piers from Radix, and we've got Kat, who's a little bit more anon, and I'm going to let her do the talking about her introduction. In fact, while we're at the end there, ladies first, Kat, do you want to give us a bit of a background and a rundown on you and why you're here to talk about DeFi and Web3?
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm usually pseudonymous, so this is like intense social anxiety, but thank you so much for being here, the few of you. I'm a little black cat. I exist in the metaverse with everything for decentralization, DeFi, DAOs, investments, advice. I'm a DeFi mentor at Gitcoin Kernel, and I work across several L1s and dApps, while I also advise. So just all over the place a little bit, so yeah.
Cool. Piers, give us a bit of a rundown on you and Radix.
Sure. So I'm the CEO of RDXWorks, which is the core developer of Radix, which is a layer 1 protocol specifically focused on decentralized finance. We launched our mainnet last year. It's currently around $1 billion market cap. And we're just in the process of launching our programming language and Radix engine, which is designed to make the developer experience radically easier and more secure in building DeFi.
Nice. Sounds pretty interesting. Actually, there's a few questions on that coming up in a little bit later on. And last, not least, Zaki, give us a bit of a rundown.
Yeah. So mostly I'm known for my work in sort of building and launching a lot of the Cosmos ecosystem. I have been building consensus protocols and doing protocol design for 7 years. One of the things that I'm working on right now, you'll see my name associated with many things. One of the things that I'm working on is something called Sommelier Protocol, which is a L1 blockchain that coordinates execution of DeFi strategies on other blockchains, which sounds like a completely crazy thing, but I think it solves a real problem in the DeFi space, which is that DeFi is becoming very complex. It is becoming too difficult for ordinary users for the dream of ordinary users as like fulfilling roles that are normally reserved for financial intermediaries. And I'm trying to figure out how do you actually allow that to happen without introducing custody into the picture.
A very necessary piece in the landscape indeed. Now, because there's only a few of us up here and we're all builders inside the space, I'm going to make this a little bit more chatter-esque and take the opportunity to involve some of you guys and ask a few questions. And look, if we're chatting and there's a question that comes up in your mind, don't hold back. Just shout out, raise an arm, do something to grab my attention. And I want to hear what your question is, because this is a whole opportunity to learn. We're with some of the best people in the space, and so let's use this opportunity to kind of build from there. But with that being said, I'm going to fire off with the kind of first question. Let's level set this. I wanted to ask, and I'm going to ask it to everybody in the panel to get your opinions, but Kat, starting with you, what is the difference between Web3 and DeFi? Is it, are they one and the same? What is it to you? Because it's understood differently by different people from different perspectives.
Yeah, that's a very layered question. So I'd say that they're concentric circles of the same subset. And Web3 is the larger subset. DeFi is a slightly smaller subset. As someone who sort of entered this from altruism and digital currency and then fintech and then DeFi, I think Web3 is an upgrade to what we knew as Web 1 and Web 0. And Web 2, of course, which is the basis of fintech, which is the basis of Wall Street. From there, migrating on to decentralization of infrastructure, just becomes decentralized finance and then decentralized everything else on the blockchain. So I'd say that Web 3 is definitely the larger subset. And as we build projects and protocols and embeds and dApps inside of DeFi is when we start to establish that DeFi layer.
Cool. And when you look at it as a smaller subset of Web3, then where in your mind's eye, what is Web3 to you then?
I think Web3 is so much more. Web3 is harnessing the power of the blockchain in, and this is a slightly unpopular opinion, but in an enterprise, centralized and decentralized fashion, it allows for everything. It allows for anything that has block heights and block structures that may not necessarily be decentralized, and that's okay. So if you want to build something like a warehousing system, but you want it to be extremely centralized, and SAP decides to go enterprise, that is also Web3, but that's not necessarily DeFi. So there's like a sort of difference between the two of them there.
Zaki, what about you? Where do you think that Web3 is at in terms of when you're explaining to your mom or your dad or whatever, how do you explain what Web3 is?
Yeah, so what I think we build when we build blockchains is we're fundamentally building settlement infrastructure and systems of record. I think the sort of differentiation between DeFi and Web3 is DeFi is really about using these systems of record and settlement infrastructure for things that those things have been traditionally used for, which is flows of money, aggregation of capital, pay in, pay out. These are kind of the traditional uses of it. But what we've done is we've sort of turned settlement infrastructure into this public good that can be used by anyone, and we're making a lot of progress in terms of scaling it while retaining sort of high quality settlement infrastructure. So now these kinds of systems of record are available to use cases that would never have been able to do it, like trading, JPEGs and other things. So I view this as as Web3 as the same use cases, but the Web3 use cases are the non-traditional use cases of suddenly having access to high quality settlement infrastructure for all of sort of consumer technology. And DeFi is let's apply the settlement infrastructure in a new setting, but for what it was traditionally used for.
I mean, your grandparents must be extremely advanced to to get all of that into one set. But I totally get where you're coming from, Piers. When you're looking at DeFi, and obviously we had this huge rise, with DeFi Summer, and then for me, it felt like the terminology Web3 came out after DeFi Summer. It wasn't existent in that time. What is it for you guys? Why do you, how do you differentiate? As a product here, just out of my pure interest, will Radix be purely DeFi, or is it going to be focused on the Web3 space as well?
So I always struggle with these differentiations between Web3 and decentralized finance in the same way that I think it's very difficult to draw a line between finance and the economy. Finance pervades everything that we do or the majority of the economic activity we do is humanity. And it's everything from how you buy a coffee to Uber starting to do things like provide loans to their drivers to the way that you think about building a company or launching it or whatever, to how you actually run a company. The finance function is the sort of the central part of it. So I think of DeFi as basically the underlying infrastructure that makes Web3 possible, because if Web3 is about ownership and creating assets that are interchangeable, whether or not they're JPEGs or items within a game or loan applications like Aave, it's all essentially decentralized finance. Decentralized finance is the enabling layer for that. And I agree with Kat. Like for me, decentralized. The thing that makes these things important is they're built on open, permissionless, decentralized ledgers. You can still then build a permission system on top of that. And I think that if we're thinking about what we want the future of the global financial ecosystem, of what the future of money, of what the future of ownership looks like, we want that to be on something that is supranational, that is completely and utterly as reliable and resilient as possible, which is why decentralized infrastructure is the starting point for creating this new basis for finance. But finance is everything, but it's not everything, if that makes sense. There's still the creative side, the joy side, the thing that makes the human experience fun, that isn't just able to be brought down into ones and zeros and numbers. So I do see that there's going to be more of what makes gameplay amazing, or what makes creation amazing, all powered by this underlying infrastructure. But right now, I would say that Web3 and DeFi are essentially the same thing. Like if you're building an NFT, it is a DeFi object. If you're building a DeFi, an NFT, a play-to-earn game, it is a DeFi object. But I think there will start to be a bigger separation over time as more of the Web2 style of user experience and flows come into that, and then you start to get this merging of like social media and finance that will start to then give Web3 a bigger purview than just the underlying infrastructure.
It's a good point about the social media aspect. I often think of Web3 as that very much convergence point between what we've seen as social media now and where we're going to see social media in the future. Kat, from your perspective, what's going to be different for the user in the future between like the social media experience now and what they can expect in the Web3 future?
I think most questions in Web3 are so subjective. I think there's a lot of work to be done before we can truly say that we've given people a good on-ramp. I think there's a lot of work to be done on ramps in general, on-ramps and off-ramps to fiat. Because if you can't really use your crypto, then are we even building? It's like we really need to get there. So I think what the Web3 has to look forward to as an industry is generally just getting on the other side of the bell curve. So we've started off with a bunch of building, which is very becoming of every new industry. But we need to mature as an industry. We need to battle harden. We need better cybersecurity. We need better infrastructure. We need to optimize. And then we fall off the other side where we have a bunch of matured product stage problems. I think we've just scratched the surface. So I think people just have like an open playing field to look forward to be honest. It's just build as much as you want, break as much as you want at the expense of the users, definitely. So that one's not something they look forward to, but eventually get to a stage where we're ready for mass institutional adoption and therefore mass people adoption. So it's just, we're just getting started, yeah.
Do you not think it's quite a scary proposition, though, to build as much as you want and break as much as you want? I mean, typically in the Web2 space, everybody's been given these products that are very polished and work very well and do a very fixed
Yeah, but they
fixed
didn't.
function.
They didn't.
Well,
like if you went back in time, it was all janky. It was all horrible. Like Web 1 was awful. Like Usenet was awful.
Piers, I'd like you to refer to my MySpace page, which was absolutely beautiful. I mean, the way that the cursor changed was it was some of the best programming I've ever done.
I was on high five, I'll have you know.
Any Friendsters in the space? That's going seriously far back. But actually, that is a really good point. It's easy to forget because time fixes a lot of things here, right? Yeah. So, I think a lot of people. When was the inflection point for Web 2? Can we apply that inflection point for Web 3, Piers?
Yeah, it was when utility So it's when utility overtook belief, and it's an abstract way of saying it, but if you look back at Bitcoin, people didn't use Bitcoin because it was actually a better version of money at the point in 2008, 2009, 2010. It's because they believed that it could be, and they wanted to be part of making that happen, right? But it was an awful actual utility for money. You couldn't buy anything with it. You could send it to some believers, but most people would be like, "Can I send you Bitcoin?" They'd be like, "No, can you just like send me a bank transfer?"
Cost an awful lot for pizza.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So like the 10,000 Bitcoin pizza. But like at the point that utility outranked belief, I didn't have to believe in the future. It just was better than what I already had. That was the inflection point for Web 2. And that was probably around the time that things like Facebook started to emerge and things like Google started to emerge. That was like when people were like, no, I can see why I should actually get online for this. Is my opinion anyway.
Zaki, can we still find your MySpace page? Is that still live, or?
I never had a MySpace page.
What? I thought we both had the same friend, Tom. No?
No.
Okay.
No.
So this shows my age then. When was your entrance point into what was social then, and where do you think, the social that you have seen will go in Web3?
I mean, I guess a couple of things. One is, so I would say my entry point into Web 2 was probably Blogger. That was probably my sort of first and foremost sort of formative Web 2 memory, is like when Blogger got started and having a blog. I generally don't think that I think Web 2 has soured a lot, basically. User generated content has become it started out in this it sort of started out as this kind of weird utopia, and then became very harmful and very negative, and it became a surveillance industry very, very quickly. And one of the things that I think is interesting is with Web3 and crypto is that we've never really had that sort of Garden of Eden time. The bad has always coexisted with the good. Yeah. And to go back to your question about is it good to be building and breaking and operating in this fully adversarial environment? Maybe probably the mistake that happened with Web 2 is that we didn't build for an adversarial environment. But the adversarial environment happened anyways. We didn't think about protecting users. We were just oh, we'll just assume humans are good, and Google won't be evil, and then build on top, and then assume this is critical infrastructure for society, and then everything turns into surveillance and exploitation and monopolies, and we're okay, well, we're screwed. Right, and so I do think there are advantages to just sort of the ugly side of Web3 too. Because we're clearly not building in this utopian world where we assume everyone is good. We more assume that terrible things can happen, and the markets today are terrible things happening, and we are we continue to build.
Yeah.
And
Web3 for the cynical.
Do you think it's avoidable though? And I'm going to throw this out to anybody who wants to answer quickest, but we've ended the view on Web 2 and certainly social and how transacting was done online was everything's going to be good. This is fun. Everybody's happy. A lot of people in the space had come from the Valley, and it was just a very different kind of view. And then, of course, it got radicalized in certain ways. Is the way that we're building Web3 now, is it avoidable the pitfalls that happened in Web 2? Who's going to take it?
I think that you can see it in all of the cycles, because so much of what is happening in Web3 and what the founders' mindsets are and what the builders' mindsets are is you can just read it on Twitter. You see this continuous cycle of hubris and then trauma that happens within the market, and that hubris and trauma creates a set of learnings that the next people or the same people then build and learn from. And so I always go to the in the UK, there was this boom in the railways where people thought that railways, like the railway technology was created, and then people thought the railways were going to be the answer to all transportation, and so there just became this race to put down track, and there was more track put down than anyone was ever going to use, full stop. But it also created this infrastructure that has benefited the economy for like 100 and whatever years since. And a similar thing happened in the dot-com boom with the laying down of like optical fiber cable. There was one point where there was the 98% of optical fiber that had been laid was dark. And that was like at 2000, that was just at the peak of the dot-com boom, and someone went on stage and went, this seems a little wrong, we're still installing optical fiber, and that was kind of one of the things that triggered it. So I think that what happens in the periods of hubris is that a lot of investment and innovation happens, but like not all of it is good. And then in the periods of trauma and capitulation and all that kind of stuff, you end up getting this, people always talk about bear markets as being the time for the builders. You get this point where you can now, through like more rational eyes, go, what are the things that we should take away as good things we should definitely do? And then what are the anti-patterns for things not to do? Because in Web3 and DeFi more than anything else, everything is a market, which is often, as a result, you get these Schelling points, these equilibriums that form as a result of the collective behavior of large numbers of people. And it's very difficult to predict what that's necessarily going to look like. And so, a lot of these Ponzi economic token schemes that felt like they were inevitably going to always be successful don't always turn out to be but some designs are good, and you can look at those and go, this is a great way of building. So I don't think that we're going to avoid the problems of continually making mistakes, but I think that's all part of the human process, and it should be celebrated as such, but there's going to be pain along the way. In terms of whether or not we're going to avoid the problems of Web3, of Web 2, I think that they're in the making in the same way that we saw what happened with the banking system and the capture by the insiders and the ability of the insiders, a small number of insiders, to get incredibly wealthy. I think that there is the same moral hazard risk that's occurring in Web3 today. And whether or not we're able to deal with that as an industry, as we're able to work out how to do that, I see good signs in that everything is publicly available on Ledger, and that there is a lot more transparency in the way things are done. But there's going to be regulation as well that's going to stop insider backroom dealings and insider trading and stuff like that. So I think these are all stuff that there's going to be some things that come in that just stop bad people doing bad shit because they can, and there's going to be some stuff that is inherently better about how this infrastructure or the technology works that makes it more transparent than the system that came before.
I really love the analogy of the railways there. I think it really explains it very, very well. And in fact, funnily enough, Kat and I were talking just before
I think that
came out.
analogy only makes sense to the British people.
Oh, really?
It's true, though. It's true, though. I gotta say that's true.
That's probably...
But we have our own
railways?
global analogies, nonetheless.
I mean, any particular country we went and colonized as well, generally, we built major railway systems there. But no, I get the point. Maybe we should focus on the fiber. Although really, as an American, then that's probably still
as an American, the fiber makes a lot of sense to us because now we have good internet.
Right. And there's dividends from that, and there's dividends you couldn't even predict, right? In terms of that connectivity leading to more people being able to be onto the internet, which meant more people could create these companies from their bedroom that were not. That wasn't really necessarily why the companies were installing it, but that is a benefit that's come.
And honestly, I don't think there's ever been a build-out phase where so much of the learning is essentially open sourced.
Right.
Both the code, the systems, the infrastructure pieces, all of that is open source. So lives forever essentially. But also the economic models, the business models, so much of that is also contributed to the public domain. And I think that's very unique about this period of time.
I think that's very true. I think there's never been an opportunity for people to radically change their lives through the amount of education that is available, and therefore building upon that education. I mean, I certainly in my lifetime I've never seen anything like that, and I don't think I've seen anything like that in history. Maybe Gold Rush. But even then, you didn't have the education material. You really just had to go to the place and learn from the other folks. And a lot of those folks would be probably trying to give you disinformation, which is actually probably not that unlike a lot of the crypto space. But okay.
I mean, there was a time. Just the thing that I always go back to is the Gutenberg press and the Gutenberg Bible. That was the start of the Enlightenment. That was what meant that we eventually came to the scientific method and was the seeds of the Industrial Revolution. So I think that there was that was like the first point in which people had access to knowledge. And now what we're doing is we're open sourcing not only knowledge but entire systems of building that people can then iterate on. So I think it's equal to that, but I think it's going to be as revolutionary.
I feel like this is written at the beginning of the Radix white paper.
No.
That felt very weird.
First, there was the Gutenberg press. Then there was the Radix DLT.
No, there was the generic
continues.
There was a generic notion that I was just about to make when you said that. So I was like, no, telepathy. But crypto is essentially the largest tectonic shift since the Industrial Revolution. And when you build something like that, you gotta break. Otherwise, you can't build. And the worst part is, all of crypto is math, because all of Wall Street, I was about to say Wolf on Wall Street, well, Wall Street is math, and all of DeFi and finance is math, and the economy is math. And the one qualifier that we never quantify in math is the massive margin of human error. We never gave developers the opportunity to break the way that crypto is breaking. It's not breaking by desire, it's breaking by consequence. We never thought of these permutations. We never thought hackers would get this smart. Everyone is getting sophisticated in the process, and the worst part is everyone has to build in public, in the public eye. Everyone's looking at you. Smart contract audits are getting every day. Imagine Web 2 or Web 1 when people audited a company. No one ever did that. No one held you accountable the way that Web 3 does. And I think as a people, we progress so much more when we're decentralizing or we're building on the blockchain. Or I just think it's freed up a lot of people in spite of the little blip of the trough of sorrow that you're going to go through in that bell curve. But once you get out on the other side, I think it's all for the betterment of us. If you really zoom out with a really large lens of decades and centuries, we will have come so far.
I 100% agree. And I often feel like it's one big magnifying glass on top of crypto right now. We're such a tiny, tiny industry, and we equate to such tiny amounts of money in the global kind of economy, and yet we have the biggest megaphone around. All the news networks look at us when there are big things that are happening, good or bad. But typically bad.
Mostly bad.
Mostly bad. and so, with all of that kind of pressure on an industry, I suppose the question I'm going with here is there's a lot of people who look at this this is a built product, it's safe, I can put money in here. And there are excellent examples this week, without going into too much detail, of where people have put a lot of their own cash into the space, and they're now finding that it's not as safe as they thought, because the space is built to break, but that's not how it's portrayed. Is there anything that we should be doing as an industry to show that this is still an experiment? Is it still an experiment, or are these active, live companies that should be fully backed by 100% of anybody's portfolio? I'm going to throw that to Zaki.
I mean, I don't think that there's anything in this space that is sure and certain, but I don't think that there's anything in the legacy environment either that is for certain. The risks are different, the risks of loss. Everybody has been talking about, the decline of publicly traded tech companies is in some ways similar or greater than the decline in cryptocurrencies. So it's not like there's any place where there's low risk. There's just different risk. But there's a lot of technical and systemic risk that is sometimes hard, like the risks are, for a fully transparent system, the risk can be somewhat obfuscated. But like, we also, I think the risks are frequently just like there on Twitter, which is not necessarily true of your SPACs and your various other sort of conventional financial systems. I don't know. I don't think that the regulators have done a great job of insulating the public from risk in general. And I think it is somewhat on the cryptocurrency industry to sort of figure out how to communicate collectively about what is risky and what the risks are. And some parts of the industry do a much better job than others. But it's hard to find people who are neither like perma bears and everything is wrong, and people who are like, oh, like there is no risk here. There's a lot of risk in Ethereum. Just like as an L1, the merge is going to be a particularly high risk thing. But like kind of what Ethereum looks like post merge has a lot of question marks. But the current system also has a lot of risk in it. So we should probably as an industry do a better job of going to these conferences, going to these events, talking more about what could go wrong.
Do you think regulation could fix it?
No.
Yeah, I think that there's two sides. To me, there's two sides to this. One side is like investor protection, consumer protection, and then the other side is like essentially not treating people like adults. And I think that what regulation does a lot at the moment in the traditional sector is doesn't treat people like adults. Like a good example of this is the the accredited investor rules in America, where you have to have over a certain amount of money to buy certain products, which then suddenly assumes that you understand these things. And like it's just that we use bad metrics for working out how people should access things or shouldn't access things, that it's still a very intractable problem because a lot of people, like we intrinsically as humans want to believe in get-rich-quick schemes. Like we like the idea, everyone likes the idea of shortcuts. And it takes like slow brain work to go, no, like that this is probably too good to be true or whatever. And like helping people do that I think is an unsolved problem in society, full stop. Like everyone wants shortcuts rather than doing the harder work side of things. So like even if you had extra regulation around this stuff, I'm still not sure that people won't find a way to eventually make stupid decisions. I think for the space to mature, it just needs to work out how it creates educational material, helps people understand, like is self-checking itself. Like there are plenty of people within crypto who do call out, as you're saying, Zaki, on Twitter when something's clearly a scam, when something shady is happening and stuff like that. Making sure that's more widely available or whatever, I think we're going to get to some more solutions on that in time, and that's going to come. But I agree. I don't think more like overweening regulation is necessarily going to help in this particular instance. On the safety security side of things, is this still an experiment? Like, just from the Radix point of view, our view is yes. Like one of the things that we spent a long time doing is rethinking how you build smart contracts from the start, because we think that a lot of what we see in a lot of the hacks that happen, a lot of the exploits that happen, are often down to the complexity of architecting these products in the first place, or the complexity of stopping things like recursion errors, or stopping things like authorization attacks and things like that. So like there's a whole set of things that I think can be better at the very low level in like how things are executed and how you build how you actually build smart contracts in the first place, that can then lead on to better applications being built higher up. But then there's a bunch of things that are important, like audit and stuff like that, and getting people more around this idea of building in a defensive manner rather than just like move fast and break things.
And sorry, I was going to ask you, Kat.
No, I see a hand in the audience has been raised for a while.
Sorry.
So while he gets a mic, I'm going to say very quickly that while I agree with both of you, there's like a slight segue in terms of, like I was processing the original question. Narrative is everything. So when we started off as an industry in Web3, the memes or the hashtags that were on the web were not GM and they weren't WAGMI, they were NFA and DYOR. Do your own research, and this is not financial advice. We started off like that. That's who we've always been as an ethos, because everything is like risky. No matter how much you audit it, there's just something you haven't thought of, right? And there's also something to be said about marketing. I know it's a very lame word and everybody it's a very abused word to a certain extent, but when you're shilling a token, how often do you talk about pitfalls or potential problems or caveats or things that you know are a bug that's in patch down the roadmap, but just not yet because you just have too much tech debt? So narrative is everything, and narrative is very personal. You have to take onus for your own narrative. You can't expect regulators and institutional capital to always fix everything for you. You have a problem, you have a caveat, you're trying to build something extremely new, it might potentially break. So why not just go ahead and own that and say that? The biggest problem is when we hire people to do marketing, like when you outsource it or you get someone and do it on board, they go to these bloggers and influencers, they literally copy paste what you want them to say. And that's not the whole story. And then, beguiling, like gullible people just buy into it and then they hate you for life. Like, who wants that? So good protocol health or good project health is when you have like a neutral narrative, like you're not too strongly for or too strongly against anything. Sorry.
Sorry, let's get to the question over here.
Yeah, my question is mostly, what do you think is the role of communities and most specifically governance in more or less being like watchers for these different rug pulls or like different scams happening in different blockchains, or for example, MEV, sandwich attacks. Do you think governance should take a more active role in ensuring the safety of the entire community?
Who wants to take that one?
I can take a stab, and then I guess everyone can. I think governance, again, is one of those things that's been spoken of endlessly, and we always dress it up in the same way, like DAOs or governance. No, it's not necessary, right? The question that's been asked is extremely subjective in nature. So what are you? Are you an L1? Are you a DApp? Are you a protocol that is refusing to open source your IP code because it's just IP for you at this point in time? Are you refusing to go 51% external validators because you're just not done building? You're going to take a while to actually get there. So who are you is what determines your community. And I always say this, again, it's an unpopular opinion, but launching in a bear market is just it's just the best thing ever because the expectations are so low, and you also end up attracting those rabid fans, like the people who really like what you're building, your very initial 100 people in Discord, the people who stay with you likely for life, the people who claim your first few bounties. And that also comes to bounties. So it's one thing to expect community to be able to watch out for you. It's quite another to understand the mental capacity of your community. Are they content writers? Are they shillers? Are they traders? Are they devs even? Like, do they even understand the stack you're building on? Maybe you're building a very complicated chain and they don't understand stack, in which case, even if a Cybele attack is sitting in your GitHub, they're not going to see it. Only somebody on Immunify or HackerOne who's like actively looking for something just to make money is going to see it and probably come at you. So I always say don't be stingy with your bug bounties because you're going to lose all that money anyway, especially if you don't batch it through. And I see some of the largest protocols I absolutely adore, love, and have very large portfolios in, have very small bug bounties. And I'm like, why would you do that? Like, you're not going to get that money back. So if you make it related to amount of money drained, then you can prevent some sort of attack. So like in the old banking days, there used to be something called community ethical hacking, CEH. It was basically when a bank set up a website, they would invite community and invite hackers, white hat hackers, to hack into it so that they wouldn't be able to drain funds, and then they would patch everything that you found. A lot of communities can do that. So if you have issues and a chain's been halted, it's not necessarily your fault, because a lot of your devs are probably doing their best, and your community probably just isn't just there with the stack you're building right now. What they can do is constantly communicate. What they can do is constantly help you hold fort at a time when your devs and your core team doesn't have the time to answer the Discord or Twitter or just like basically man the fort. And I think there's something to be said about community being more than token traders and going beyond that. And I think that's aspirational, but that's not everyone's that lucky, especially if you're building something complicated.
Did you have a point to make, Zaki?
No,
No,
that was really articulate.
No,
That was
it
fantastic.
was
That
a
was
random point.
fantastic. I will add one thing, which is that like we talk about governance in the crypto world in a way that is so naive versus the corporate world. If you look, even if you start a company in the UK, I'm going to talk about the UK because that's what I know.
Sure.
You have your articles of association, and a lot of people think that's the only thing that governs the company. It's not. Behind that is something called the Companies Act 2008, which is a huge piece of legislation. Like, if you printed it out, it's like a frickin' Bible. And that is all the rules, the collective understanding of what is necessary in building and growing and running companies to make sure there is balance of power, to make sure that there is oversight, to make sure that there is like the proper structure of board of directors and executives and as it grows, how you do that and what the protections for minority shareholders are and what the protections for majority shareholders are and what the rules are if you're a publicly traded company and all this kind of stuff that has taken the capital markets like a couple of hundred years to do the same kind of mistakes that we're seeing in crypto today, where insider interests happen. Oh, now we need a separation of the governance from the executive. Like all of this kind of stuff. So like, I think the crypto world can do a lot in not being too arrogant in thinking that we can just reinvent everything without having to just learn a little bit about what's happened before elsewhere. I think there's a huge amount to still go. But yeah, governance, I think, is what narrowly defined as in the crypto world isn't actually what governance really is, and there's a long way to go for that.
I think there are some projects, I think like the Maker Risk Collateral Risk Committee continues to be like incredibly impressive to me as like a governance function. So I think it kind of shows that like life cycle matters too, like being just like things figure this out as they get older.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work to be done, but like I do think that there are positive examples in the industry.
And yeah, for what it's worth, I agree with all three of you. And it was a really great question. And I would have loved to have had more questions from you folks out there in the audience. But looking at that clock there, which says we've got 20 seconds now to wrap this up, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody who's on the panel. And for those who came along this afternoon, I hope it was worthwhile for you. We'll be outside over there for a little bit after this if you want any more questions. But other than that, thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.